Hey, folks. Welcome to another edition of our monthly live chats. Today is going to be an interesting one because I think we all go through some of these challenges. But before we get into that, as always, little introduction. I'm Magna Gopal. This is my monthly live stream podcast on YouTube and Facebook. And the purpose of this live chat is to address some of the issues, the common problems that I sometimes hear about either from students or coaching clients or that I've experienced in my own life, and to share some of those solutions with all of you. And hopefully get some of your feedback. And if you've gone through anything similar in your own life, this is one of those places that you can share your experiences, and hopefully we can open that dialogue and that conversation to other people in our community and beyond. This is sometimes a little bit longer. It can be about 60 minutes sometimes, depending on the topic. So I always try and keep it short, but I want to discuss all the points that I've written down because they are important, and especially with today's live chat, but kind of with all of them. For those of you just joining, let me know where you're joining from so I can give you a quick shout out. Let me know which city or what country. And we'll get started. Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, check out the Empowered with Magna podcast. That is available anywhere that you stream your podcast: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google Play, etc., etc. And if you are interested in online courses, dance courses, coaching courses, public speaking development, check out my website, magnagopal.com. And again, wherever you're joining from, let me know. Say hello, say your city, say your country, so I can give you a shout out. And all right. Erica. Oh, you've moved. Where were you before? You're in Des Moines, Iowa. I think you were somewhere in the South or in central US. Wade from Queens on a cloudy day. Indeed, we're not far from each other, just across the river. Erica used to live in New Jersey. Again, wherever you're joining from, let me know where, and I can give you a little quick shout out. Denver, that's it. That's it. I have never been to Des Moines. Am I saying that right? Definitely don't want to say Des Moines, but I think it's Des Moines, Iowa. Never actually been to that state either. Anyways, let's get started with today's topic. So the reason for this topic was because I got a question on social media from someone who has a dance school, and the question was about safe spaces, kind of creating a place that feels comfortable and feels safe to the people in the school. So I'm just going to read the question first, the comment, long message. So he says, I generally would appreciate some help, tips, guidance on how to handle situations where mostly female students feel uncomfortable with other students in the class. It might sound simple and straightforward, but a lot of times it happens in moments we never see as teachers. Either it's outside the classes, or it's so subtle that you couldn't even see it. It's more the energy or of how they touch and connect. We obviously want our classes to be a safe space for anyone, but it can sometimes be pretty hard to put that into practice. If it's just a feeling or the way he said it, doesn't mean that it's not real, but it makes harder to confront. As much as I feel the need to confront the person, I also don't want to create an environment where my students feel policed. We as dancers want to think of a dance studio as a place where you only dance. But for many people, going to a salsa course is a way to potentially meet someone. So, first of all, those of you here or watching the replay, you can put it in the comments. Have you experienced this? Like, have you ever felt uncomfortable or not feeling like your space, your classroom environment, whatever community isn't safe, or you feel disrespected, or you feel like someone is um, encroaching upon your boundaries? And if you are someone who has a dance school or runs some kind of community, do you ever feel like you're seeing this or people are coming to you with these similar issues? If you've ever had it, ever, let me know, because safe spaces are important. And safe spaces are basically a place, an environment, a location, physical or virtual, where people, ourselves, everybody feels respected, we feel valued, and we feel free to express ourselves. And it's important in creating those safe spaces that people are heard and they're understood and they're accepted. And in this case, with this comment about, it becomes hard to confront because you don't want to dismiss what somebody says based on it's just a feeling or it's just the way somebody said it. And maybe you're taking it out of context. You want to hear them and you want to accept whatever they're saying and accept that the feeling that they feel is real. So, our safe spaces, as I mentioned, they could be a physical location like a dance studio, it could be a community like our dance community, or even virtual platforms, right? Social media, anywhere that you engage virtually. But the challenge of creating a safe space is that it's complex, right? That you need to talk. You need to have open communication with a lot of people to kind of get on the same page of what is a safe space. Now, for me and for the person who had asked this question, I would say there are a couple of basic steps and stages where that we need to go through if we are trying to create a safe space. First is we need clarity of our values, our principles, our motivation, our purpose, our mission. And that's not just for us if we are the leaders in that space or in that community, but it is also for us as participants in that community, members of that community, students of that class. We need to be really clear on our own values and our principles and why we are there. From there, we can use those values to build a set of boundaries or a set of rules and responsibilities and regulations. And we're going to go into the challenges of each of these steps soon. Once we've kind of discussed or decided what these rules are, we need consequences, right? For breaking the rules, because what are rules if there are no consequences? And once it comes to setting those consequences, we need to enforce them. Challenges there too. And then ultimately, the kind of final stage in the trying to set up a safe space is handling the repercussions, because there are always going to be repercussions to effecting change, especially if that change goes against what's normal or what's acceptable. So, again, for those of you listening live or tuning into the replay, do you have a struggle or have you any experience in an environment where you felt personally like you were not safe, that your boundaries were being encroached upon, or that you were feeling disrespected, or as someone who's in the community or as a leader in the community, have you observed this elsewhere? And also, of course, still my regular comment of if you're here, let me know. Let me know where you're from so I can give you a shout out. And If I know you, I think, Erica, I know you've had a school, so it would be interesting to hear if you've had any experiences with that, as an instructor and as an owner of a school. So going into kind of the values and principles, right? There are so many differences and loud vehicles on the street. There's so many differences in people. There are differences in culture. There are different levels of understanding. What feels safe to one person might not be the same for another, right? What is acceptable for one person might not be the same for another. What feels safe in a community might not resonate with another community. And this is the part about reflecting and getting clear on our own values and our own principles, because whatever we've experienced through life is going to impact how we define the world around us, right? What's acceptable, what's not, what should be the norm, what do we need to fight against, what do we need to change? Like, I'll give you an example from my childhood. In India, um, in school, there was a lot of physical discipline, right? The teachers, if they saw that students were acting out, sometimes you get a little smack. And initially, I thought that was quite normal. When I moved to Canada, that was really unacceptable. And I did not understand. And even as a kid, I was like, well, why don't you just, smack him a little bit, smack some sense into that kid who's acting out. And other people are like, what are you talking about? That is not acceptable behavior. But that's what I grew up around. Eventually, I spent more time learning in the education system in Canada that I saw that that is not acceptable. So even my values changed a little bit as a kid. If you've grown up in some communities or cultures where men chase women and persistence is a good thing, you might think that's romantic. I mean, how many times do we see that in movies where there's a lead character who just won't give up? The girl keeps on rejecting him, saying no, 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 and he doesn't give up. And ultimately, the end of the story is this beautiful love story, right? Happily ever after ending. And so, what are we learning through the things that we see in society? Right? We might say, well, that's harassment, but does that depend on who is doing the harassment? Right? Are we very strict with our values, or are we also subjective with them? Am I going to be more upset if somebody I'm really not attracted to is constantly pressing and trying to invite me out for a date or something? Would I be the same with someone who I do find attractive, but I'm not entirely sure if I want to? Right? There's a lot that changes. And that's where kind of creating safe spaces becomes difficult, because we all have certain standards, we all have certain values, and they are a reflection of what we've grown up with, what we've seen, what we believe is acceptable. But even those values are not written in stone. They change, they adapt, they will kind of mold into the moment that we're in. And so it's a fine line when it comes to kind of uh, regulating that behavior on a bigger level, right? Versus one on one versus singular interactions between two people, regulating that for a community or a school or any environment, right? Even with expression, like I would say dance is a great example, because when I started, I saw things a certain way. Even expression was kind of outlined to be certain movements, certain things that a follower does, that a woman does in dance. My approach to dancing, as many of you know, is quite different from the norm. And initially, when I started wanting to express myself differently, when I looked at the dance and said, well, why is it so lead centric, or why is everything um, dependent on what the lead wants to do? Why not the follower? And also, why does the follower have to only move her body in sensual ways and sexual ways when there's so many more ways to move to interpret the music, right? Nobody else was really doing that. So it didn't exist per se. And when I started to include that, because those are my values and self expression, I got a lot of pushback, a lot of negative comments, a lot of criticism. And these are all things that I still get today because there are people who believe differently. But if I had stuck to it, or sorry, if I had conformed rather, right, to the pressures from the other people in the community, I would have never become the dancer that I am. I would never advocate for other people expressing themselves as authentically as possible. I would have never become a solo female leading the industry as a solo female and paving the way for other solo female artists if I did not think and believe that it was possible for women to have careers that weren't attached to men or dance companies. Right? These were some of my own values that I had to push through, and I had to create a safe space for my expression, for my approach to this dance, despite the norms that were already present in the community, in the industry. And that is kind of the challenge, right? There's there's people who believe certain things, and it's hard to change the way that they think. And there are people who want certain change, and it's hard to kind of divert them from their paths too. And there's a quote. Let me just find it. I had it saved. All right, there we go. So Stuart Chase said, "For those who believe, no proof is necessary. And for those who don't believe, no proof is possible, or no proof will suffice." Right? So when we are trying to create a safe space, we are saying there's something wrong here, and we need to create change to make this a safer space. But for those who believe that it's not wrong, it doesn't matter what you say to them. Sometimes they're going to be stuck in their beliefs. And that is the real challenge when it comes to creating a safe space. So, in this dance example, this question that was asked to me about their school and their classes, what one of their students feels is inappropriate might be okay with another. And how do you enforce this? How do you set rules? So, one of the ways is you got to have an open dialogue, right? If it comes to your dance school, if it comes to your organization, your community, maybe you poll people, right? Maybe you put out a poll, maybe you ask for people's input about, how do you feel about this? Is this inappropriate? Would you change your mind if this person was doing it versus that person? Try and find out, where are people's values? Where are their boundaries? What do they define as a respectful space or a safe space? Or maybe you bring it up in your classes, right? When you get a chance, because as dance instructors or dance school owners, you have a leadership position, right? You're in a position of authority. Maybe when you introduce your classes, you start discussing these things. Don't just go right into your basic step, but talk about the community and talk about proper ethical behavior and treatment of each other. But maybe don't talk about it in the way that is reprimanding anybody or judging anyone, but open it to input and questions from your students so that you can gauge where people are. Or you expand it even further, right? Create a community. But you'll see, when you take these kind of issues to social media, a larger platform where many voices can be heard, you can see the 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 range of responses, from complete blind agreement to completely blind disagreement to everything in between. And that's really what makes it challenging. And that's why I say it's so important to set our values, to really understand what is important to us. Because if you are leading, if it's your school, right, or if it's your class and you're the leader there, you got to lead by example. If you don't have clarity on what you believe and what you value and what you think is acceptable, what exactly are you going to be sharing or asking other people to follow? So the clearer we are on our own boundaries, the clearer we are on our own values and what we find acceptable and why, the easier it is for us to set some boundaries and expectations. And then it's about clearly communicating all of that. Right? So if you're in class and you're saying, all right, look, folks, um, it's been brought to our attention that some of our female students are feeling like there's some inappropriate touching. We do not accept this in our class. If you get 2 or 3 complaints, right? One complaint is one thing. We'll bring it up to you. But if you get 2 or 3 complaints, then you will be some consequence, right? You need some consequences as well. So there's got to be some kind of tolerance, zero tolerance, perhaps, with an option to protest. Because again, one person's opinion on an interaction could be completely different from somebody else's. What they feel might be completely different from the intention of the other person. And if that is the case, then are you open to communicating that? Are you open to hearing the other side? Or are you going to enforce your policies without any input? Because it's important for us to still understand that. Danny, you asked, do you say it to the class or just to the person privately? I would say it to the class generally, but speak to an individual privately if there is an individual who's been called out. Speak to the entire class and talk about your expectations and what your rules and regulations are in your school. Explain what the consequences are, right? Because we do need some kind of consequences. But if there is someone who's being called out regularly by multiple students, you speak to them privately and give them a chance to explain, because they will have an explanation for it. Give them a chance to explain and then talk to them like a human being. Because again, many of the things we do, many of the actions we take, our behaviors, our view of the world is based on something from our past. It's based on things that we might not even know until we go to therapy or really reflect upon our lives and our childhoods and our upbringing, right? I can give an example, a personal example. My childhood, my parents were very traditional Indian family. Guy said what to do when the woman was expected to just follow along. That's what I understood. How did I take that into my relationships in the future? Well, I always kind of pointed the finger at myself. I always thought that I was wrong if anything went wrong, because I'm the person who's being told what to do, not someone who has input in there. And that was a result of my childhood. It took me many years and many unsafe relationships, not that they were um, all really, really bad, some of them were, but unsafe relationships to understand and change my definition of what a safe relationship, what a healthy relationship looks like. So if you are addressing something like this with another student privately, you might find that they have reasons for why they did something or why they thought something was not wrong, that they thought something was acceptable. And it's important to hear them out, not to say that you accommodate that behavior, but it's important to hear them out, because otherwise there's no way to correct it. All right. In enforcing some kind of penalty without understanding why that person did something does not necessarily create a long lasting solution. Really, what you want to do is not just prevent that behavior, but you want to correct the behavior. And there's no way to do that without understanding why the behavior exists in the first place. So you have some rules and regulations, you have consequences, right? And this brings us to, like, what are those consequences? You need to have some kind of consequence. Otherwise, people feel enabled, right? Or people feel like whatever it is that they're doing is acceptable. Let's go to parenting, right? I'm sure we've all had different types of parents. And we know people who've had really strict parents and people who've had very lenient parents. The people with really strict parents often change their behavior. If you don't do the dishes and you are grounded and not allowed out, not allowed on the phone, not allowed to hang out with your friends, well, you will most likely start doing your dishes because there was a consequence for you not doing that. People who are told, listen, if you don't do dishes, then you are, um, I'm going to ground you. But when you don't do the dishes, there's no grounding, right? You kind of sneak out of it. Then what are you thinking? You're thinking you can get away with that and that dishes are not that important, anyways, because if they were, there should be some consequences. That's parenting. Um, there's this show called Americans that I was watching. I think it's an old show, but just watched it recently. And it's a timepiece. Right? It was a timepiece when people smoke cigarettes everywhere. I'm old enough to remember that myself. uh, Today, there's no smoking anywhere, right? And how did we get here? Because there were establishments that kind of closed their doors to people who smoke. So if you smoked and you want to smoke inside, well, you can't smoke inside. So if this is your favorite restaurant, well, you can't come here and have a cigarette while you are eating dinner anymore. Or there were fines if people did it and they weren't supposed to do it in a certain area, there were fines. So people eventually started to feel the consequences of their actions and eventually behavior got changed. Right? And change was gradual. Right? Those who believed in creating this kind of healthy air environment for everybody, they took those first steps and either just by themselves or through laws for their small community with multiple establishments started to ban certain behaviors from their spaces, right? There were people who disagreed with them, for sure. There were people who decided not to go there, right? But there were consequences for not adhering to the new norm, to the new standard, to the new definition of a safe space. Platform moderation is another thing too. I look at all the rules and regulations on various social media platforms of what you can say and what you can't. YouTube, for example, if you're posting a video and it's full of speech that's violent, or you're talking about sexual things or anything like that, there's moderation there, right? And what are the consequences? Well, if you do something that violates their policies, you get kicked off the platform. And then on a personal level, speaking out, right? There's there's um a challenge with even just speaking out. Forget the rules that come into place that can fine you or kick you out of some place, right? But there's consequences even just to speaking out. I remember a moment at an event, a large event. It was not done well. A lot of people were not getting paid. There was very poor logistical coordination that put the majority of artists at a kind of disadvantage and was asking really too much from them. Not like just not even treating them properly, respectfully, humanely. And some artists who were there had a different rapport with the organizer, had a different status in the organizer's eyes, and they were getting favorable treatment. And I had said something at this event. I, solo female, so I don't have a partner holding my back. I didn't have a team backing me up. I was just by myself saying what I said. And another artist with a really big name said something back to me. And they started yelling in the room. There were lots of people around. They were yelling and they had turned their back to me while they were speaking. So for me, those are disrespectful behaviors to me. Though based on my values, if you want to have a conversation or if you want to even have a disagreement with me, you can, but you need to respect me and speak to me like a human being, not just talk to me like I'm some servant on the side who should bow my head and listen to you. I don't agree with that. And so, what is the consequence of doing that to me against my values? I spoke out. I said something to that person. If I didn't say something to that person, maybe that person would feel like that was an acceptable way to speak to anyone and everyone who is under them in terms of experience and status. Maybe after that interaction, they didn't. But there needs to be some kind of action. There needs to be some kind of consequence to bad behavior. And again, going back, that bad behavior really needs to be defined clearly. We need to be able to identify what it is, why it's bad, and what we think is good, and how to do good behavior instead. Can't just point a finger and say that's wrong. You have to explain things because many of the people, not all, some people are intentionally manipulative and all that stuff, but many people who do things that we don't find acceptable don't even know. They don't even realize that they're doing something that's unacceptable because that's not what they grew up with. And so we have to give them a chance to understand their side so we can help them understand the importance of change. Michael in the house, Boston. Hi, Michael. Nice to see you again. I'm loving this topic. I feel like this is helpful hearing everything you're saying because I have started teaching. I always say on the first class, unless you know your partner well, no touching soft spots. I don't even know what soft spots are. I I feel like before I started working out, every spot was soft. So um but even then, I'm gonna before I go into kind of repercussions of enforcement, um what Michael said, right, is unless you know your partner well, no touching soft spots. Well, now it's a matter of what's knowing them well and what's a soft spot, right? Those are the things that need to be defined to make sure there's no misunderstandings. And ultimately, as a result of a misunderstanding, something action is taken, behaviors take place that shouldn't happen, right? So, um, like hips or behind, okay, so clarifying, like hips or behind the neck. Great. So if you are outlining those specific spaces, that's good because then people understand what is a soft spot. But also, unless you know your partner well, that I would say is, make sure it's acceptable. Find a way to understand what's acceptable with your partner and be able to read body language that is telling you that something just doesn't feel right or it feels like it's in my personal space, right? And that's another thing that people don't, they're not very good at reading, right? We all want to say we're great partners. Right? We think about dance, great partners because we can lead and follow, but sometimes we're not reading those subtle signals, right? A slight twitch of the neck if somebody touches the back of your neck, slight twitch, which is like, what are you doing? Right? Or a little eyebrow raise that says, is that appropriate? I don't know. And I think that's where we need to communicate more and we need to teach more than technique, teach more than just moves. We need to teach people these other additional things that make for an effective partnership and a safe interaction, right? For example, Taeyeon just said from South Korea, it's the shoulder for me, right? A shoulder seems like a very common place to make many of the leads happen. So those soft spots are also different. Just like right now in chat, we're seeing the difference in definitions, right? The differences in who we are and what we areas that we feel are acceptable for contact. And Wade said one of the important things of creating a safe place is the purpose is for the purpose to create a healthy classroom environment to bring focus to the teaching and avoiding distractions from students. Yep. Yeah, because ultimately, when it comes to a safe space, on a personal level, individual level, if you are in some kind of relationship, it's to grow, it's to become your best self and be your best self to somebody else and help that person do the same. When it comes to a classroom environment, it is to become better as an instructor and to help your students grow. When it comes to a community, it's to make that community a safe place for people to express themselves and to help them contribute and to grow that community. That's why we need to create a safe place, a safe space. Wherever we're at, we need to create that. But it requires us to reflect on our values and our principles, to understand where we're coming from, to be open to understanding where other people are coming from, to be able to define and communicate effectively what our boundaries are, to establish some kind of consequence for breaking and invading that space, breaking those boundaries, to enforce those consequences and then deal with repercussions, to have the resilience to deal with the repercussions. So let's go into the repercussions because this is one of the greatest challenges of creating a safe space. We have personal motivations, okay? We have personal motivations for whatever we do. It could be to make money. It could be for fame and status. It could be to be liked by somebody else. It could be to feel included in a community. Right? There are many motivations that we have. So we need to first be clear on these motivations because when it comes to enforcing consequences, your values are going to be tested and your motivations are going to be tested. And if you're truly want to stick to your values and uphold your values, you're going to have to be willing and able to deal with those repercussions. So let's go back to the example of parenting. Parent says, if you don't do the dishes, you're going to be grounded. Motivation of a parent is to help their child grow. But at the same time, you want to feel loved. You don't want conflict in that relationship. So when you now ground that child, I remember when I was grounded, how angry I was, how much I felt hatred. I mean, hate back then, not to the degree that I would define hate today, but I was like, I hate you, right? I am sure that my parents felt a certain way when they heard that from me. And I know my dad had certain principles and he stuck to them, regardless of how I reacted when those rules were enforced. My mom, on the other hand, she broke. She would always cater to whatever it was that I did just to still be liked by me. So that's one repercussion. If she really wanted to like stick to the values and say, look, if you don't do this, this is the consequence and I am going to enforce it. Yeah, we would have had a slightly strained relationship, but I think eventually I would have understood. But instead of that, I basically just broke more and more rules because I knew there was no enforcement. Let's go to the example of smoking, right? Regulations, how they've evolved. Now, today, all businesses, at least here in the US, there's no smoking allowed inside. You can't smoke cigarettes inside. Can't smoke cigarettes on an airplane. You'll get kicked out. And the business is not going to suffer. But initially, when they started with those regulations, think about the Businesses that first said, I will agree to this. I believe in this, and I am going to support it and I'm going to enforce it. People were still smoking. There were other establishments that you could smoke inside. So these businesses ended up losing business. What is the motivation of starting a business? Right? Provide a service, but also make profit. And so here they are sticking to a certain set of values and principles and losing money as a result. That's a repercussion of enforcement. Platform moderation, right? Sometimes by trying to create a certain space with certain rules and regulations, you end up unintentionally creating a space for the exact opposite. Look at some of the social media platforms that we have for texting and commenting and all that stuff. Some of them have very strict rules about what you can say. They have automatic bots that will scan your text for certain words, and you'll get flagged for posting something that includes any of these banned words. And you'll get flagged a couple of times, and then you'll get locked down until whatever, for a certain period of time, or until you explain yourself and get your account reactivated. And some people who really want to speak a certain way or behave a certain way can't do it on this platform. And what happens? Now there are many other platforms out there that are encouraging and open to more hateful speech. There is no moderation there. And the reason for those places to exist is because of the moderation in other areas. So that's another repercussion, right? You might send people or invite people to go and create the places where they can do whatever they want. And then speaking out. So going back to that example of where I spoke out to this other artist who was a big name, bigger than me at the time. When I spoke out, the repercussion of that, there was no actual repercussion, but this was the possible repercussion that could have come out of it, because I heard tons of people who were in the room tell me this later. I can't believe you said this to that person. I can't believe you spoke to that person in this way. And the reason was because that person could have tanked my career. They had so much influence that they could have said, you know what? I can't believe she didn't allow me to yell at her out loud in public around all these people and turn my back to her. She had the nerve to say something to me. Who does she think she is? I'm going to make sure she gets no gigs in the future because I have that clout. I have that status. And I'm going to talk to other people that I know, other, organizers in my community, and I'm going to make sure nobody books her. It was a risk. That could have been the repercussion of me speaking out and standing up for what I believed was acceptable behavior. I could have tanked my career. It didn't happen, but it was a risk I was willing to take. So when it comes to creating safe spaces, you have to understand that taking a stance and setting rules comes with further consequences. Setting rules and enforcing rules comes with further consequences. And are you willing to sacrifice for your values? Are you willing to say, in this case of the dance school, right? You want to have a safe space. You've now established what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. You have also established the consequence that if you are a repeat offender and you have been spoken to, you've been given a chance to explain yourself, but you continue to do it, you will be kicked out of this school. Well, that's a loss of income. Are you willing to do that? What if you have multiple offenders in your class and you got to kick out Half of your class. I hope that nobody has this situation, but you got to kick out half of your class. That's a lot of money. What if you were relying on that exact number of students to break even, and now you are in the loss? Are you still willing to take a stand? Are you still willing to set the rules to create that safe space for the others? Because just like the smoking example, it took time before everybody jumped on board and it became the norm. Initially, the people who took that action at the very beginning by banning smoking indoors lost business. Are you willing to do something like that where you could lose something? Or are you willing to speak out against something that you do not find acceptable? Because by speaking out, you could possibly be ostracized, right? You could be now excluded from the community. People no longer want you around or don't want to engage with you. These are the repercussions. And our resilience in these situations is what ultimately allows us to create the safe spaces that we're looking for. You can really only be responsible for what you have control over. You can't control other people's choices. And when it comes to upholding our own values, are we willing to give up the personal benefits that we might get or that we already have? Thoughts and questions, feel free to share them into the chat. Again, the reason for today's topic is because I got this question. I've heard it in other environments. I've heard it from other people. I've heard it from instructors, and I've heard it from students as well. And I wanted to discuss it as a live chat because I don't want to, casually skim over it with, 1 minute going live for a second. I really wanted to take some time to address it in a way that I hopefully helps us understand a little bit more of what's involved and what's at risk. Is, many of the things that we want to pursue that are worth it require some kind of sacrifice in the beginning. And Taeyeon, you broke the rules and created something new. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hi, Alex from Brazil. Again, if you're joining now, feel free to say hello in chat and let me know where you're joining from so I can give you a little shout out before we continue. So, my last point with this safe space and creating a safe space is that we have to be flexible. We've got to be able to adapt to the way society is changing. We have to make tough choices. We've got to be willing to sacrifice some of those benefits that we have and feel like we can still continue. And that it is not one-sided. This was a question from an instructor, an owner of a dance school, asking how to create a safe space. Right. So first of all, we've already established they're not static. They're evolving. They're constantly changing. And they change based on the people that are involved because each of those people bring their own experiences, their own biases, their own values and principles into the equation. So it's always transforming and shifting. But there's not just the element of providing, right? So as an instructor or an owner or a leader, if you want to create change, you've got to be able to set those values, set the standards, communicate what is acceptable, what isn't, communicate the potential consequences, enforce those consequences, and be willing and able to accept any risks. But there's also the seekers of safe space, right? I want a safe space for myself. If I'm going to a class, I'm not the leader, I'm not the instructor in that class if I'm attending, but I still want a safe space. And if I'm seeking a safe space, I've also got to be willing to give things up. It's when we feel like we can't walk away or that we can't give up what we have or that there's more benefit to something out there that we could gain if we don't walk away, despite things not going according to our values and principles. That's when we end up in shittier spaces. The same example with that event, speaking out against that other artist because I felt disrespected and risking tanking my career. The reason is because I wanted a safe space. I did not want anyone to think that that was acceptable behavior with me. And I spoke out. And if it did end up tanking my career, well, I was willing to give it all up. And that is key. If you're seeking a safe space, you might have to give up that place that you want to be in because it's not safe. So what's more important? How you feel, where you feel comfortable, where you feel safe, or being a part of a community despite them not providing those things to you. So you might have to walk away from that community, that school, that instructor, that person. And so we, as seekers of safe spaces, also have a responsibility to hold true to our own values. And we have to accept that sometimes there is a loss that comes with wanting something that is not present. For me, that was dance. That was a career in dance, which I loved from the bottom of my heart. But I just refused to accept that someone thought that they could speak to me in that way, yelling in a room with their back turned to me. That is unacceptable. I would not want them to do that to anybody else, but you definitely aren't going to get away with doing that to me. And so I said something, and I knew there was a risk. And I was willing to take that risk because I would rather not be in a community or be in a space where that kind of behavior is acceptable. And that brings me to one other point for ourselves. If we're constantly finding ourselves in unsafe situations, in unhealthy environments, we need to reflect. Okay, we need to find out why. We need to understand why we are there. And there are many ways to do that. You can journal, you can talk to friends, you can seek a therapist, you can ask for help. But it's important for us to understand why. Like I said, my childhood experience between a couple, mom and dad, was that the man is in charge and the woman does as she's told. That was a traditional Indian family back then. Okay. That's what I understood a relationship to be. For a long time, I found myself in these kind of relationships where the guy was kind of dictating everything and I didn't really have a voice. And I kept finding myself in those situations. And it took me a long time to understand that it wasn't acceptable. And what did it mean? Well, I had to end those relationships and also say, if anything like this is present in my next relationship, I will not go in or I will walk away. Even if there's a nice connection, even if the person's attractive, even if they're really sweet and all of those things. But if they have these controlling, manipulative behaviors, I need to see those red flags and move away immediately. I don't want to perpetuate it. I don't want to fall deeper into that situation. Same goes for the communities that we're in, right? Because We need to we need to be our own strongest advocates, because no one's going to fight for you if you're not fighting for yourself, or if you don't believe there's something worth fighting for. Those other people that are fighting for something similar to what you would want or what you should want, they're fighting because they believe it's important to them. You are benefiting as a result of their fight. But for you to get those same things, those same qualities of life, of love, of relationships in your life, you have got to believe in it, and you've got to be willing to fight for it and willing to lose for it. Because not every space is healthy, not every relationship is healthy. And we need to decide that. We need to be able to assess our lives personally and see where bad behaviors or our norms and our experiences are impacting our actions and behaviors. We need to be open to hearing different opinions and listening to people who've struggled through something similar, have come to a different outcome or different understanding. Listen to that and see if we can assess our lives against that, right? We need to be acceptant of people's ability to change as well. But the only way we can encourage that is to make sure we're not enabling it in the process. And that's where consequences come in. And again, consequences don't have to be um, necessarily something like banning somebody, fining someone, or what is the term? Ah, darn, I'm at a loss for the word. Like boycotting, kind of, right? It doesn't even have to be that. It could just be you saying this is unacceptable for me and walking away. And as leaders, if you've got your own school, if you've got a community, if you're leading a class, if you are serving other people, then serve them well and understand that you will get pushback. There's going to be some kind of resistance to the change that you want to implement, because of the places that other people come from, because of their own understandings or lack of understanding. And you've got to be open to the dialogue that can break through that lack of understanding and build a more resilient community, something that's more inclusive, where everybody feels valued and respected and safe and expressive and wants to contribute to the continuation of a healthy community. Like, ultimately, with this question, the reason I didn't reply in a quick message to this dance school owner is because, at the end of the day, there's no simple answer, right? There's no simple solution. There's so many elements of this that we have to consider, like the platform, right? If you're not the platform that's going to provide me the space where I can say whatever the hell I want without any kind of filter, well, I'll find one that does. And so if you're not the person that's going to allow me to be extra physical with students here, I'm sure there's other schools, right? I'll just join another school. So I'm not really eliminating that behavior. And if there's a space for that behavior elsewhere, well, it's going to get enabled and it's going to grow, and it might influence other people to be the same, right? There's so much diversity of experiences and values that we bring to the table from our own lives that makes this complicated. But doesn't mean that we shouldn't start. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't take steps to advocate for what we believe in, advocate for people who we can see are struggling, who might not feel like they have a voice to speak up, to speak for them, but to everybody, and to build a better understanding. Ultimately, that's what it really comes down to. Back to the quote by Stuart Chase, right? For those who believe, no proof is required, no proof is necessary. And for those who don't believe, no proof will suffice. right? So you need to get people to believe in what you believe in. And the best way to do that is to lead by example, to be really clear on what you believe in and why, to be able to communicate that effectively to other people, to have a set of values that you don't compromise. So you do enforce them if they're not respected and adhered to. So people understand that you've got a strong moral character, right? To be resilient through the repercussions that you experience as a result of standing up for your own values, so that other people can see through your example, whether it's you as an individual being a part of a community, a seeker of a safe space, or you as a provider, a leader in a community, an instructor, or the head of an organization. You got to take those first steps to understand things and to believe in something so strongly that you will not falter when you are faced with these risks that are guaranteed to come along. You know, the risk of losing money, the risk of losing relationships, the risk of losing your status, the risk of losing a position, the risk of losing your popularity, right? There are all these risks, and depending on your motivation, which only you can clarify, and you know whether you say it accurately and honestly or openly to anybody, only you know that. When you can clarify your motivation, it'll be easier for you to stick it out when it gets difficult, to make those tough choices despite the consequences. And worst case, if you don't have strict rules or you're not ready to take that step or you don't know how, offer guidance and support to the people coming into the community, whether they're your beginners or whether they're new students, intermediate, advanced, doesn't matter. Anytime someone steps into your space, explain why we behave the way we behave and why some things are acceptable and some things are not. And explain that what you might think is acceptable might not be acceptable to somebody else. So communicate openly, you know, understand where someone else is coming from before you make some moves that could be considered harassment or, you know, make someone feel uncomfortable and unsafe or disrespected. Like, get people to think, especially in our dance community, get people to think beyond dance moves. The dance is physical. We make physical contact in ways that many people don't ever do outside of their personal, intimate relationship. And many jobs, most careers don't involve two people touching and holding and embracing. Dance is unique and special in that way. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful aspect of what dance provides. But it does open the doors to a lot of misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and poor behavior sometimes. So clarify things the best you can. And if you, and this is another additional point, if you've ever been in a situation where you felt certain things similar to what someone's expressing to you, or you were even on the um, offending end, right? Where you were the person who was making all the moves and people were like, no, 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 but you just kept on pressing, right? Share that experience too, so that your students, the people, the members in your community can see that you're just as human as them, that you had some behaviors that were unacceptable, that you didn't understand them yourself, and that you kind of came through, learned, and became a better person. And this is why you believe what you believe. That's really the only way for us to make change. right? To effect change, for us to build these safe spaces, which, as I mentioned at the very beginning, they are absolutely crucial to our development as individuals, as dancers, as students, as members of a community, anything. If we don't feel safe, we don't feel like we can express ourselves. If we don't feel safe, we don't feel like we want to engage fully. So we need to seek it out for ourselves. We need to ask when we don't know, when we're unsure. So, what this person's student did about coming to the instructor and saying, "Hey, this happened. I don't know. Is this appropriate?" Ask that question. If you find yourself in a sketchy situation, ask somebody else. And hopefully, they can give you some good advice and say, "Listen, that's not acceptable. This person might be manipulating you, or pushing the boundaries in terms of physical contact, and here's how you can address that," right? Or, "Would you like me to address it?" Or something, right? Offer that guidance. But ultimately, don't give up. It's not easy to create this space, right? Nothing of what we've achieved in the history of mankind, of voting rights and marriage equality and all of these things, came easily. But somebody believed. They believed in the fair treatment and safe spaces for all of these people, and they advocated for it. They got a lot of pushback, but they pushed still. They're resilient in the face of all of the criticisms and judgment that they received. They kept pushing, and ultimately, we've all benefited. So that's you. You can lead that change. If you're the leader, the provider, you can lead that change. There might be some risks, but you can still effect change. And if you are the seeker of a safe space, even your actions and your experiences shared with other people can also effect change. I hope, that I don't know if, like I said before, not an easy answer, not an easy solution. There are many things involved when it comes to creating safe spaces. They're still worth it. We should still try, but we do need to assess our values, our motivations, and our aversity to risk. Because if we're not willing to take risks, we're going to stop short of many of the actions required to take to create these safe spaces. And with that, thought it would be faster. I always think it's going to be faster. But with that, I wish you all a great day. If you want to support this channel and support the continuation of our live chats, which is 3 years now. This is live chat number 36. You can click in, I think it's a Ko-fi link in the description, buy a virtual coffee for me, or support the channel with like, subscribe, share it with your friends. And if you have any comments about any of this that we discussed today, if you have any personal experiences that you'd like to share, leave it in the comments. Or if it's so personal that you don't want to put it publicly, complete the feedback form and let me know what your thoughts are. I will do my best to support this community that has given me so much, that has also forced me to really identify and clarify what my values are, what I believe in. And it's shown me that I'm resilient because I had to push through a lot of things to create the spaces that I believe are now safe for many dancers to express themselves however they want, for many females to pursue solo careers, which nobody had when I started, right? So it provided me with all of those opportunities. I want to give back, and I want to support other people who are doing the same. Not easy, but it's always worth it. I wish you all a lovely day and a lovely rest of your weekend. And thank you for joining again. I will see you April 4th. That'll be the first Thursday of next month. So far, we're doing Thursdays. We used to do Wednesdays, but we're moving over to first Thursdays of every month. So I will see you next month for the next live chat. If you have any thoughts or any topics that you want me to discuss, you can always DM me as well. Feedback form is the best place because you can go into a lot more detail and I can better understand where you're coming from and what your experience is. Because, Instagram, Facebook messages, it could get lost and I might miss it. With that, have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you for joining today. And to the owner of that school, thank you for submitting that question. It was a challenge to prepare today's live chat. I really sat down and said, like, what are safe spaces? Like, well, how do I outline this in the best way possible that really truly includes everyone, but includes the best of everyone? And that is really leadership at the end of the day, personal leadership and leadership within a community that invites people to be their best and shows them a better way. And that's what we can all do. That's what you can all do. Okay. It's not just me, it's everybody. And it's small steps and it's understanding what you believe in, what your values are, being able to defend them, and being able to risk some momentary gains in favor of like holding on to those values. Thank you, Wade. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Candelaria. Thank you, everyone else who joined earlier, and thank you for your comments. We'll see you next month. And always a challenge to get out of here.